Welcome back, everyone. Up first, we have the team from Symphony AI, Rachel and Troy. Hello to everyone.
Hello.
Hello, Chris.
So Rachel is here in the U.S. Troy is in France, I think. Are you in Paris, Troy?
I am in Paris for another couple days, yes.
So thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. It's a good bit later there. I am actually going to hop off and let you guys do your thing, but stay tuned. I'll be back. Have no fear. So Rachel is up first, and we'll get going.
Great. Thanks, everybody. As Chris mentioned, I'm Rachel Hadaway, and I lead product management at Symphony AI in our merchandising solutions. And Troy, he is my counterpart leading supply chain solutions from product management perspective. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about AI and GenAI and really how it can impact both retailers and private brands. And we're at a really interesting time. But really quickly, before we get into that, we are from Symphony AI. Symphony was founded in 2017 with the goal of putting AI at the heart of the most challenging retail problems. And so our company is in just about every region in the world, supporting many retailers and CPGs, and is focused on quite a few retail domains, from supply chain to insights to assortment and space to computer vision. We really cover the gamut. But the one thing that is true is that we're focused on incorporating AI into our solutions. The interesting thing about where we sit today and actually being on this call is we're at a really unique time in history. And I'm not going to bore you with any of the statistics that you guys already know. But right now, this high inflation that we've seen over the last 3 years has led to unprecedented shifts in consumer behaviors. So if you look at this chart, you can see the price levels at the start of the pandemic to where we sit today. And you guys probably experience this in your daily lives too. You get a little bit of a sticker shock when you're doing your shopping, whether it's in groceries or drug or really any vertical. You're seeing that high sticker shock. And what we've seen is that the average consumer has seen prices increase about 22% in 3 years. That's a big number to go in and see in the store. And what's that's led to? Some of these things are good to be on the receiving end of, but we've seen brand loyalty deteriorate to a point that we've never seen in history before. We're starting to see consumers shift out of traditional grocery into lower price alternatives. We're starting to see people constrict. The baskets are getting smaller. So there's all kinds of these different consumer behavior shifts happening right now. And while we do expect inflation to get better, a 3-year period like this does begin to shift people's behavior longer term. So we're at this really interesting time. We're starting to see consumer behavior shift. But at the same time, as this consumer behavior is shifting, we're seeing these massive technology advancements. And some of them will impact very shortly. Some of them are a little bit further out. But as savvy retailers and brand managers, part of it is, how do you impact those consumer shifts that are happening to you by leveraging technology that allows you to find a different path, a better path. And during Chris's interaction with the AI avatar, they talked about some of those fears that we have. And what we want to talk a little bit about today is, how do you use technology to move beyond that fear on behalf of your brands and retailers? So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about all of this technology that's come to life. And there's been a lot in the last few years, whether it's energy storage, the way that renewable energy is changing things. We've probably seen that just driving down the road and seeing hybrid cars. Certainly the Wi-Fi-ification of different countries and bringing Wi-Fi to different parts that haven't had it has certainly changed the knowledge base that the world's population have. But the one we're going to talk about today is artificial intelligence. And anytime I talk to friends and family about what I do and talk about AI, always what comes up is the Terminator and Skynet. And I think that kind of has colored what we think about AI. But what Troy and I want to do is bring that back a little bit to reality and talk about how AI can really impact in a positive way retail and impact private brands. And so we really want to narrow in on the technology that's helpful, not the technology that's scary. So stay with us for a little bit. We're going to talk about how we see artificial intelligence impacting retail and where we think that's going to leave kind of jobs and things further on.
All right. Thanks, Rachel, for that great introduction. Let's talk a little bit about what GenAI is and how it manifests itself and brings value to you as users and your businesses. Fundamentally, what is GenAI? GenAI is some incredibly powerful algorithms that are designed to leverage vast amounts of data and bring sense to that data and provide insights, information, and in some cases generate content and useful artifacts for you as a user. It sounds pretty impressive, and it is certainly, but when it comes to your specific business, there's a lot between what I've just described and really useful, valuable, positive outcomes for you as a practitioner for your business. Let's move forward and talk a little bit about how we get from here to there. So, as I have already mentioned or implied, generative AI is really powered by data. I don't think there's any particular surprise for anyone around that. And these models are trained on very large data sets. And when we say very large data sets, we mean it. Basically, we mean the internet, the entire internet, right? So it's a huge amount of data. And what GenAI does is provide very powerful synthetic capabilities on top of that data. So in my words, I think the most impressive thing about GenAI is its ability to synthesize information and answers from human language questions and prompts. Is that useful? Is it useful generally? Certainly. Is it useful to you in your business activities? Yes. Can it be more useful than that? Absolutely. In order to get there, we have to customize that by essentially giving access to more interesting types of data, which is business specific data and specifically your business data, right? And we also have to give it some tools to work with that data effectively. So let's take a look at what we do for that. To talk a little bit about the technology that's involved, there's lots of these large language models out there. And by lots, that's a relative term, certainly. There's a relatively small number of highly advanced LLMs out in the market. Everybody, I suspect, has heard and is familiar with OpenAI at this point, but there's also others like Llama and Falcon and others being built and improved every day. On their own, they are quite useful to everyday human beings and also to us in our businesses. But for us to make a very specific high value use of LLMs and generative AI in our businesses, we have to supplement the data that those LLMs have been trained on with data that is specific about our business. So an LLM is trained on public data. The public data does not include data that we would consider, for instance, intellectual property or things that are confidentially known only within our business. That may be data about our sales, our products. It may be particular processes that we leverage to create value. It may be particular documentation about technical aspects of our products or services, right? So the first thing that we need to do is make all of that data available, or at least large parts of that data available that is relevant to solving the particular problems that we want to solve, and also teaching the LLMs how to make appropriate and most productive use of that data. So let's take a look at how we do some of those things. A user of, say, ChatGPT today inputs a question, or in sometimes not so much a question as an instruction maybe. We call this generally a prompt, right? And we hit enter, and a few seconds later, we get a response from ChatGPT. And in many cases, it has synthesized some data. If you've asked it about a particular historical period and summarizing the key events of that historical period, or maybe you've asked it to write an outline. Rachel and I are both product managers, right? So I'm sure Rachel, just as I have, has asked ChatGPT to write an outline for a product requirements document or something like that. And it's very good at these things in general. It is not good on its own doing it specifically for my business or your business. So in between these two very succinct bubbles, we need to add a lot of sometimes very complicated things. And what Rachel and I are going to do, I think today, the biggest value I hope that we bring to you today is to show you some of lessons learned and the ways that we've been successful in leveraging generative AI to drive value that is specific to our business in our world of retail analytics and execution solutions. We're going to, by necessity, oversimplify and generalize some of these things, But I would say one important thing, and maybe the first most important thing that we have to do, is to create what we call agents internally to Symphony AI. And different companies may have different names for this, but ultimately everybody is going to have something like an agent that is essentially the brain that instructs the LLM how to go through a particular reasoning process, what analytical skills or models to invoke to answer particular types of questions, what actions to take. There may be dependencies, if then types of activities, if this action, then that, or if this response, then that action, or similar types of things. But the agent is essentially the brain behind all of these activities that coordinates all of the various steps that an LLM goes through to interpret data and arrive at an answer. I mentioned in an earlier slide that LLMs are extremely good at synthesis, and they can do synthesis on whatever data they have available. So I've mentioned we add business-specific data, right? So you want to add the data that is specific to your business. I gave you some examples of that. But one of the things that LLMs on their own are not good at, and to use the very succinct way that our CTO, a very brilliant guy, puts it, they don't do math very well. Right? There's a lot implicit in that statement, but essentially what we mean by that is, sure, will it add and subtract simple numbers? Absolutely. But can it on its own go through sophisticated analytical processes to arrive at answers that rely on complex logic and processes? No. So one of the things that we have to do is embed what we call AI skills, right? And a skill is essentially a set of incremental tools that have been packaged up and identified as appropriate for solving a particular type of analytical problem. We teach these agents that, based on the particular prompt or question or instruction that a user has inputted, first of all, how to interpret that prompt. So what's the nature of the question, for instance, being asked, and what skills are now appropriate to generating an answer for that question. The agent can then go on to invoke those skills in a particular order and in a particular combination to ultimately arrive at an answer that is relevant to you. So you can see that things get quite complex in between those two very simple appearing bubbles. And all of that complexity can be generalized to some things. I need to have an agent, or I need to have a selection of agents. I need to have a selection of skills. But the nature of those agents, the nature of those skills, the nature of the underlying technical pieces that are going to help an LLM to produce those answers are going to be quite specific to your business. So how are we applying these things, and where do we see really the vast potential of generative AI? And what's driving us right now is what we call this vision of connected retail. So we are in the business of serving retailers and consumer packaged goods companies. And Symphony has solutions in many areas, including shopper insights, category planning, supply chain management and optimization, retail operations, a whole wide range of various domain areas, retail. And our goal, and what we think part of the promise of generative AI, is to connect all of these things in ways that haven't previously been possible or practical. So if we go on and take a look and consider what analytical processes and solutions may have looked like in the past, if we go forward just one, we see that typically a technology company such as Symphony may have solutions in a particular retail domain. And I mentioned some of those, shopper insights or supply chain optimization or whatever the case may be. Maybe they have solutions in one of those domain areas, maybe a couple, typically not more than maybe two or three. And they provide value within the silo defined by those domains. And furthermore, those silos are really defined by the data associated with those domains, right? So if I want to derive important analytical insights around shoppers, I have a set of shopper data that I leverage to derive those insights. Similarly for supply chain optimization, et cetera. And I can create a lot of value. We all know this, but I am ultimately restricted to a particular silo defined by the extent of the data available. What happens with generative AI in the future is we start to connect those silos. So now, instead of being vertically constrained, we are able to operate horizontally across those data domains and those data silos, join those data silos together in order to answer increasingly more complex questions. This has the effect of what a term you may have heard before, a force multiplier, right? We now essentially unlock value, insights, analytical use cases that depend on the merging of data across these domains that was previously not possible, or if technically possible, certainly not practical. Generative AI allows us to move forward with these types of use cases and activities and generate value that was really, in some cases, not conceivable before, and at the very least makes us significantly more efficient in those analytical processes and really turbocharges the scope and degree of value that we can generate. So now that I've given you a general picture of how we move from generic LLMs and their capabilities to a more specific, a business-specific LLM or a retail-specific LLM and its capabilities, I'll turn it back over to Rachel and we'll begin to tell you about how these things apply to particular functional areas.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about probably the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to using AI and generative AI for retailers. And that is all about creating a really authentic customer experience. I have 3 bullets on the right-hand side of the slide that talks about personalization. So the ability to take what you know about a consumer and make all of your activities personalized for them. The second is accessibility to support. So if I have a problem, I'm able to get real-time response for my problem. You've probably seen this more recently through the use of chatbots, and you probably have had all kinds of reactions to those. Some of those have probably been negative, some of those have probably been pretty good. But all of the things that we can do with AI, even if you think back to the avatar that we had at the beginning of today's session, all of that is about making support more accessible, so support 24/7. And also, if someone is speaking to a human, they actually make it through the chat bots and all those other things, making sure that the support professional at the other end of that, either call or chat or email, has access to lots of information about the consumer. And finally, the last bullet on here is about product availability. And that's making sure that whether I'm shopping online or in store, that when I want to buy a product and I'm ready to buy a product, that product's available. These 3 things contribute more to a customer satisfaction than anything else. And the beautiful thing that we're starting to see about these 3 things is that AI can really contribute to them. So AI can help with personalization. I think later today, you're going to have a session that's all about creating content using AI. That's a big part of personalization. That support, really raising the bar on 24/7 support and improving that experience, AI really can help there. And finally, and Troy will talk a little bit more about this later on in our presentation, around making sure that our supply chain enables our products to be there. So for small retailers or even small brands, one of the things you can do is start to invest in AI to impact these 3 things, because our customers will really benefit from that, because they'll feel better about the retailer, they'll feel better about the brand as we're starting to tap in into those ways that we can impact customer experience. The next area, and this is one that I spend pretty much all of my time thinking about, is revolutionizing category management. For those of you that have been category managers, work with category managers, you know that this has to be one of the most thankless jobs in retail. It's a nearly 24-hour-a-day job, and you're constantly making decisions on behalf of your brands, decisions on behalf of your retailer. And there's not actually a shortage of data, but what there is a shortage of insights that allows decisions to happen much faster. So there's 3 areas that I think we can revolutionize the category management, and we'll see this happen within the next 2 years. The first is around strategic decision making. Like I said, there's more data than is needed. In fact, we suffer from too much data. And where AI and generative AI is going to come into play is allow the category manager to sift through all that information and start to put scenarios in front of them that they can make decisions on. And when they do that, they're going to know the impact of those decisions, not on just the category, but also the retailer and the brand. So I think we're going to really see a step change in the ability to make strategic decisions. The second area is around uncovering opportunities that were previously hidden. The way that I like to think about GenAI, and it goes back to how Troy was describing all of the agents and the skills. Today, we often are limited in finding opportunities to shift our business by our own time and our own capacity. Imagine if we now have all of these millions of agents that are out there scouring the data, looking for opportunities based on the prompt or the instruction that I have given it. So sometimes Troy, he always says this, and I think it's great. Oftentimes, it's AI is going to allow us to do things that we never would have had the time and capacity to do before. And that's a lot of time where the benefit is going to come from AI is uncovering opportunities that were previously needles and haystacks. And finally, the last one, and probably one that everybody in retail would like to do, is rebalance their time and energy. So today, so much of time within retail is spent in fire drills. Imagine if AI is able to address many of those fire drills very quickly so that we could start to move into that strategic decision making and really executing on these previously hidden opportunities. I really think that's the future for category management as some of these AI tools start to make their way into kind of the everyday life and adoption increases. The thing to know about Gen AI specifically, and Troy talked about it really well, is that it's powerful at synthesizing information. It's powerful at automating workflow. It's going to change the path. So many of us, especially in category management and retail, show up and think about our days in a very linear way. With Gen AI, you no longer have to think that way because you have these agents that are rethinking these steps for you and coming back with maybe a very different opportunity than you were even thinking. The tricky part and the challenge that most of us will have to start to think about is our path will no longer be linear. Instead of spending time weeding through data, coming up with a hypothesis, Gen AI can come back and say, this is the best path. And so now, instead of a week more of data and research, your day starts to move into the execution of that opportunity. So the path looks very different. And that's where some of the adoption challenges and the time to value will really come into play is I now have to think about my job and the way I do my job very differently. Doesn't mean that you should necessarily be worried about my job, but it's now that I'm moving into execution and making decisions versus spending all that time pulling back information and sifting through a lot of data.
That's great, Rachel. Thank you. So I'll talk for a moment about supply chain optimization, which is the focus of my world. And we confined ourselves to three things on these slides. I feel like I could list 58 off the top of my head. It's so exciting in terms of what it can do for operational and supply chain data analytics. On shelf availability, I've been in this business of retail, both on the retail business side and then technology serving retail for more years than I care to publicly admit. And on-shelf availability has been a top item in that world the whole time that I've been there. And I feel like generative AI coupled with other AI technologies, such as optical recognition and natural language processing and other things, really puts us on the brink of being able to solve on-shelf availability problems in a much more comprehensive and effective way. And also to join all of the various analytic solutions together into a fully closed loop process that doesn't just give us insights, but drives all the way through to and measurement of the impact of those activities and the value created. So I think on-shelf availability and contributing to improved service levels while simultaneously maintaining or reducing inventory levels is going to be a very powerful area for generative AI to support supply chain practitioners. Operational excellence, I think generative AI, if we think of operational excellence, not just throughout the supply chain upstream of stores, but again, as a guy who spent a number of years running grocery stores and supermarkets, generative AI gives us the potential to put very sophisticated, powerful analytics directly into the hands of store level personnel in ways that won't impact their efficiency and will improve their productivity and their outcomes, right? The other thing that's very nice about generative AI is that you don't need high degrees of training in analytics and data crunching and analysis to make very effective use of those capabilities. We can put GenAI into the hands of shop floor associates and allow them to conduct very powerful analytical processes in seconds that generate highly efficient and value creating tasks that they can accomplish quickly and effectively as a result of those analytics that we've made available to them without impacting their productivity and in fact improving their productivity. And then finally, the other area that I'll mention is vendor performance management, right? Vendors And retailers have a vested interest in working closely with each other. Vendors are constantly monitoring their cost to serve for retailers, and retailers are constantly monitoring their cost of goods and efficiency of vendors. Generative AI gives both parties an opportunity to very effectively drill into a lot of underlying data to quickly highlight and act on opportunities to improve on those areas, and in a way that creates joint value for both partners rather than at the cost of one another. And GenAI allows them to do this extremely efficiently. And to go back to the point that Rachel made a moment ago, in some cases, take action on opportunities that they might otherwise never have discovered in the first place, or that are so complex and inefficient for human users to do on their own that even if they identified them, they would not have tackled them. This is another area where I see generative AI significantly improving both performance and the positive nature of the relationship between vendors and retailers going forward. Rachel, I'll go back to you, I think, to lead us towards a conclusion.
The thing that I hear more than anything when talking to retailers, brands, really anybody in this space right now, is there's always questions around the impact of jobs. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time kind of addressing what we think happens to jobs. I think there was a period of time, probably 2 to 5 years, where most of this technology is really getting stood up. People are starting to use it. There's probably a period of time where adoption actually wanes before it becomes such a part of your life that it becomes just second nature. But what the stat on the screen says is that in the short term, that Gen AI alone could automate almost 10% of tasks in the US economy. So the question is, what happens to jobs? And Troy and I, we spend a lot of time thinking about this, talking about this, but really, for anybody on this call, I would not fear this. I wouldn't fear the automation of tasks, because I don't know about you, but if someone were to automate 10% of my tasks, that would be amazing. And my list, I would just go to the next thing on my list. And what Troy and I want to talk a little bit about is around the concept of augmented intelligence. I think Troy said it really well. There's a lot of things that Gen AI and AI can do. There's a lot of things that it still requires collaborations with humans. And so on this kind of spectrum that you see on the left-hand side of automation of menial tasks, I do think that's coming, and I welcome that. I spend a lot of time on menial tasks. And on the right-hand side, that's the very far end of the spectrum, which is the automation of strategic tasks. And I think that's probably where all of us get really nervous, right? It's not really the automation of menial tasks that have us spooked, but the delta between those is so large. And that's really where it still takes humans to write prompts, to improve prompts, to make sure that the data is right, to make sure that when you get that result, you decide whether or not you're going to act on something or you're not. So we believe, and Troy, I'll ask him to spend some time talking about this as well, that we have a long stretch in front of us, probably the entirety of my career, where it's going to be humans and AI working together for a faster, better outcome. And at some point, yes, maybe some of the strategic tasks that we work on today will begin to improve. But I think the full scale removal of those tasks probably is many years away. Troy, any take on this?
Yeah, I agree with everything that you said. For people that are concerned potentially about the impact, Gen AI's impact on jobs, I would point out that Gen AI is not the first thing that's come along that's promised this incredible improvement in efficiency that means you don't need as many people, or you don't need people doing those same types of jobs. In my experience, and particularly working in a technology field where we're constantly looking for ways to make customers more efficient, I have never once, ever really that I can think of, seen those efficiencies result in job losses. What I have seen is that people will gain the efficiencies, businesses will gain the efficiencies, they will continue to hire. None of those people that were there before will lose their jobs. They will simply be redirected to new, more interesting, and more high value opportunities that make better use of the skills that only a human being can bring to the table. I don't expect Gen AI really to be any different. I think it will make teams and individuals much more productive and efficient. I don't think that's going to result in dramatic losses of jobs. I think those people are going to be redirected towards activities where they can bring value that they weren't able to tackle before.
Yeah, and to take it even one step further, our recommendation is to actually embrace it. We hear a lot of people that spend a lot of time talking about what AI won't do and poo-pooing the advancements that it could make. But I think some of the most savvy and strategic organizations are actually going to realize how important that middle box is, that human AI collaboration. And those are going to be the ones that are most successful. So the way that Troy and I are thinking about where this comes into play, and I think it's really apropos for a private brands organization and audience, is really it's all about the rise of the small team. So how do you leverage AI to make your small team even more productive, even more effective, even more successful? So I know in some cases, and if you're on a private brands in a retailer, you feel like, the David versus the Goliath, but we think that there are so many opportunities for small teams to punch above their weight using some of these new techniques and these new tools that will allow you to really augment your own human capacity.
Yeah, I agree with that, Rachel. And I used this term before, but I think we really see generative AI as a force multiplier. And we've talked about this idea of having a half dozen MBAs in your back pocket, so to speak, right? That are constantly reinforcing your skills and creating incremental value beyond what you as an individual and your small team are doing. So I think Rachel is right on when she points out that this is going to make small teams even more powerful and effective as we go forward, and allow businesses to scale in ways that hasn't been possible or practical in the past. So I think, Rachel, that brings us to the end. Thank you very much. Always appreciate the opportunity for dialogue with you. And I think, Chris, we'll turn it back to you at this point.
Get my mic back on. There we go. Thank you both. That was fabulous. So I'll tell you, just from what we are doing day to day with AI, your observation about making small teams more powerful is spot on. We're doing work that I would have never hired somebody for. There was no budget for, there was no capacity to do. It just wouldn't have gotten done.
Yep.
And the AI helpers that layer on top of ChatGPT and other things and help you do other things are just mind-blowing. There's video editors and writing pieces that go well beyond ChatGPT and allow me to actually teach it my brand voice.
Yeah.
This super cool. Do we have any questions for Troy and Rachel out there? If not, I'm going to ask a question or two here. But as you look at the data, and Troy, how many trillions of billions of whatever data points does a Kroger or a CVS or a Walmart own that's sitting there unused? And
it's in the petabytes. It's just massive.
I don't even know what that giant number is, right? I don't even know.
Big.
So if I'm one of those retailers or a big manufacturer, a Perigo or Conagra or whoever, how do I get all of my own internal stuff and all the stuff that's out here in the bigger data set? Can I build a walled garden where I can make them, where I can have a chat, a GPT, a AI, a whatever, analyze both?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I'm a little remiss in not making that point earlier, and I should have. In fact, that is what we are doing at Symphony. And I think I glossed over this term retail LLM. But the whole concept behind a retail LLM is doing exactly what you said. The LLMs already know the internet. They know all the general data available in the world. What we're in the process of doing now is supplementing that with all of our very business specific data, all of the confidential data, all of the IP. And by data, I don't mean just facts. What were the sales and what are the product attributes and things like that, but also IP in the nature of what are our business or analytical processes that we use to deliver particular outcomes to our customers and clients, right? So we're training the LLM on all of those things to create what we call a retail LLM. And we're doing this in a way, and I love your term, I'm going to use it going forward for this, that we have in fact a walled garden. So there is extremely powerful, comprehensive, tight security around all of this to ensure that neither our nor customer data is ever in any way exposed to any outside entity or anything like that. So at the end of the day, what we end up with is an LLM that has all the power of, say, an OpenAI that's trained on the internet, supplemented by all of our proprietary confidential data and trained in a way that it can make most productive use of all of that data together and walled off in a way that nobody can ever get to it except those people that are meant to be able to. Rachel, would you add anything to that?
The only thing that I'll add, and I think it hits on Steven's question from the chat, is there's a really interesting balance that organizations have to think about. So absolutely, you can use a closed AI approach, which puts all your data behind a walled garden and things like that. The tricky thing is that at the same time, you also need to make sure that you're still experimenting with the cutting edge technologies that are coming into play every day. Like the speed to change is so important. So oftentimes what we're seeing some of the most successful organizations do is imply in both. So a closed AI approach behind a walled garden, but also still using either synthetic data or sample data to be slightly less closed so that you can still try and experiment with some of the most cutting edge things without feeling like you're putting your data at security risk or jeopardy. So we see that experimentation still really needs to happen, but you also want to employ a walled garden. Oftentimes both strategies are the most successful to get the right balance.
So you see Stephen Gilbert basically asking this question. So you got
it's a
that.
great question. Yes, it's a great question.
And I get it. I'm just in a place of, because Troy and I worked together a long time ago before I'll Hold Delhaize with I'll Hold Delhaize, and it was just Delhaize. And my challenge with all of the data was always so much it was backward looking. So if I could look for trends for product development, say, oh, we can see this is trending up this way, but it all happened already, and take an AI and say, ooh, tell me what the questions for TikTok are right now. Where is cottage cheese? Where is whatever? And combine the two.
Yep.
All of a sudden, you're really powerful. My takeaway from what you guys are saying is try things. Don't be afraid.
Yeah,
absolutely.
for sure.
Yep. And the rise in the small team. We think that this is a big boost point for small teams.
Absolutely.
All right. We appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. Take care. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.